This man's name is Chris Gardner. He is a father who is persistent, honest, smart, has a high work ethic, and has big dreams to make his family happy. To realize his dream, he ventured to take up the offer to become a distributor of an advanced medical device. Chris dared to take risks and used almost all of his savings to buy the stock of medical equipment supplies, and has an exclusive marketing area in his city. After he tried to market the device, he just realized that the medical equipment for most doctors is a tool that is quite expensive and less needed. But he had to sell at least 2 tools to pay for the house rent as well as his daily living expenses. But that time he had to be able to sell more than 2 tools to pay for his car that was ticketed. And the problem arrived at the end of this month. Chris hasn't managed to sell a single tool yet. The presence of a child and the ongoing cost of living made Chris start to have financial difficulties. So his wife, Linda, has to work 14 hours a day at the laundry to help support her family, while his son, Christopher, has to be put in a daycare center, which is also cheap. One night Linda started to get annoyed with Chris because until that time her husband had not paid the tax bill, because if it is not paid immediately, the tax authorities will take all the money in their account, where the money in their account is only enough for living expenses for 1 month. That night he listened to a TV broadcast that preached the economic difficulties in his country while trying to solve his son's Rubik's game. The next day when Chris started marketing his tools again, he accidentally meets someone who uses a luxury car. There comes a specific question, "Where you do and how are you now?" From that short chat, it planted the seeds of hope for him to realize his family's big dream. Chris told the dream to become a broker on his wife. However, his wife, who was still annoyed, mocked Chris and told him to immediately sell all of his medical equipment so that they could pay their rent as soon as possible, which was due next week because they had been in arrears for 2 months. After that brief debate, Chris started to market his tools again, but this time he tried to strengthen his heart to dare to join the broker training program held by the company Dean Witter Reynolds. He entrusted his tools to a busker and gave her money to keep his tools. Inside the office, he met with the broker team and he was given an explanation that he had to meet someone named Jay Twistle who was at the head office. In the middle of that meeting, Chris saw the busker take away his tool, so Chris was forced to leave the office and go to chase her.
Like I said.
Losing one of his tools was like losing money for 2 weeks of living expenses for him. In the train, he saw the form sheet given by the broker team, where the program will only take 20 people every 6 months and only 1 person will get a job, while Chris' last education was only up to high school. The next day he took his son to daycare. He explained about the writing of happiness, which must use the letter I, so that the pronunciation is correct. Then this innocent son asked instead, which surprised Chris with a question about some more movies he watched at the tracking sites. Should be in the nursery. The child is given some lessons. It turns out that the owner of the daycare deliberately told his children to watch movies all day because Chris was always late in paying his child care fees. After that he immediately went to the broker's training center and waited all day to meet with Jay Twistle to submit his application in person. He hoped that Jay Twistle would help and embrace his in getting a job. Result of waiting for Jay Twistle, Chris too late to see one of the doctors who had given him time to demo his device. However, this opportunity is very difficult to obtain, and luckily the doctor was still willing to give him 30 minutes, but again his time had to be wasted because he had to. Finally his wife got to see Chris come home with 2 of his tools. Instead of selling, he even added more tools. After celebrating Christopher's birthday, Linda became more angry and worse this time she did not want to care about what was going to be done and what was going to happen to her husband. Their relationship becomes increasingly inconsistent because of economic factors that continue to urge them. 1 month had passed since Chris had sent his application letter for the training program, and today he accidentally went to Jay Twistle to introduce himself and remind him of the application letter he submitted a month ago. But because Jay was in a hurry to leave, Chris finally lied that he also had plans to go to Jay's destination. In the taxi, Chris tries to establish a close relationship with Jay. He tells the story, but Jay ignored it because he is busy finishing his Rubik's game, until finally Jay was impressed by Chris, who could finish his Rubik's game in a short time. All of Chris' attempts to demonstrate his skills at work had failed. Now he is confused how he should pay the very expensive taxi bill, while he only had $5. And that's just for eat. Then forced at a red light, he fled with his tool. He kept running until he reached the underground station, but when he was about to enter the carriage, at midnight, in the midst of heavy rain, Chris tries to call his wife and apologize that he will be home late, even though he had to get home soon to accompany his son because his wife was leaving for work. This made Linda very upset. That night she decided to leave her husband and take Christopher with her. It was a night of destruction for Chris. He began to think about the Declaration of Independence, about the right to live freely and the pursuit of happiness. Arriving at home, Chris couldn't find his wife and his son. Now Linda had really left him. In the midst of sorrow, Jay Twistle suddenly called and gave the good news that the day after tomorrow Chris could be interviewed for the broker training program. Jay asked Chris to write down his secretary's number for more information, but because he did not find the pen, so he was forced to memorize Jay's secretary's number. After that, Chris hurriedly ran to a supermarket by continuously memorizing the secretary's number. There he immediately wrote down the number and asked them where Linda and Christopher were. Before leaving, Chris also had time to warn one of his friends named Wayne to immediately pay his debt of $14. In the afternoon, Chris picks up his son at daycare. He decided to stay with his child because he didn't want Christopher to have the same fate as him, growing up without a father's love. When the two of them had dinner, suddenly the owner of the house came and said that Chris and his family had to leave the house tomorrow morning. There he asked for time to pay for it. Luckily, the homeowner gave him 1 week on the condition that he had to repaint their house. The next day, when Chris started painting the house, suddenly the police officers came and took him to the police station because until now he had not paid the ticket. The police were forced to arrest Chris and will release him tomorrow at 9 a.m. until all the problems are completely resolved. Even though tomorrow morning at 10:15 a.m. he has to attend an interview for a broker training program. After that, he tried to call his wife and asked for take care of his son. There he did not tell the problem he was experiencing. He only asked his wife for take care of his son and return him when he back. The morning after getting out of prison, in a very shabby state, heavily painted, he ran to the office of Dean Witter Reynolds. Inside the room, Chris met with Jay and other officials. In the interview process, he tried to remain calm and recounted the troubles that had befallen him until he was able to wear shabby clothes at that precious time. Chris told him something and make the official be impressed. After finished the interview, he decided not to continue the program because he just found out that during the training process for 6 months, he will not be paid a dime. But Jay tries to convince him that this is a big opportunity for him. That night when Linda dropped Christopher off, she said if she was going to New York soon, to her brother's place to get a better job. There Chris said that he had been accepted to join the broker training program. The day changes, and Chris decides to move to a cheap motel with Wayne L. After finishing packing, they both play basketball together, and there Chris advises his son and says, "Never let anyone tell you if you can't do anything, including me. If you have a dream, you have to take care of it. People who can't do anything for themselves, they will tell you if you don't do it. If you want something, go for it." Point. Long story short, Chris finally decided to continue his training program. Even he don't get paid at all. Starting from that training, he got a lesson where so many calls equals many opportunities. More opportunities equal more customers. More customers, the more money. So he eagerly kept trying to find many clients to land the job. He has to compete with 20 people who have a history of high education. During recess, Chris accidentally met someone who had left his medical device at the train station, so the rest time, which was only 10 minutes, he used to take back his tools. But so poor, when he tried to catch up to that person, suddenly Chris didn't feel the impact so hard. He immediately got up and looked for his lost shoes somewhere. Finally, he had to return to the office wearing only one shoe. The following training days, Chris felt that he was very low and unappreciated because one of his managers always told him to get something, like a waiter, but he still didn't give up. He always smiles every day. Although it's actually very heavy, Chris must be able to divide his time between taking care of his son, training his broker, and also selling his medical equipment to help support his living expenses. So he has to work 6 hours at the training ground to maximize his 6 hours. Chris doesn't drink too much water, so he doesn't waste his time going to the toilet. After 2 months, Chris has not reached the target that has been set. Finally, he ventured to offer his services to Mr. Robin, a #1 entrepreneur in his area. It turns out that courage paid off. Where is Mir? Robin gave him the opportunity to immediately meet him within 20 minutes. But again, that good opportunity had to be forfeited when his manager forced him to park his car. But Chris didn't want to give up. Finally, he ventured to meet Mr. Robin at his house on holiday, bringing his son and his tools. There Mr. Robin appreciated Chris' efforts, but he could not use the services offered by Chris because they don't feel like they need it. When Chris and his son were about to leave, Mr. Robin takes them to watch a baseball game, where Chris had also promised Christopher to take him to watch a baseball. There Mr. Robin introduces Chris to his business friends. The following months seem to be running smoothly. All the medical equipment he has successfully sold, until one day he received a letter from tax stating that the bank had taken all of his savings because he did not pay taxes. And at that time Chris was completely broke because he only had 33 cents in his wallet. It's morning when he and his son are leaving. The motel owner shouted at him that Chris had to pay the motel rent immediately because there is no other choice. He finally collects his debt to Wayne, but there Wayne said that his debt had been paid since he helped him to move. In the park while Chris was daydreaming, suddenly he saw someone again carrying his medical device. Chris always thought that the device might be the only help for him and his son, so he took the device back and planned to resell it. But on that day, Chris had not managed to sell it until Christopher complains of being tired and has to keep up with his father marketing his tools. When one of the doctors planned to buy it, turns out the tool was no longer working because one part of the tool is damaged. In the end, they were forced to go home empty-handed. And even more sad, When they arrived at the motel, turns out the motel owner had taken out all his stuff, so Chris took his son away, and the last choice was Wayne. That night Chris plans to hitch a ride at Wayne's house, but Wayne didn't want to open the door for them. In the end, they went to the station with no destination at all. There Christopher fantasized if only the tool he was holding was a time machine. Then his father tried to comfort his son by convincing him that it was a time machine. Then he told his son to press the button on the device and closed his eyes. And after that, turns out it was just Chris' way of getting his son to sleep in a toilet at the station. There Chris tried to put his son to sleep with only a tissue, and if someone wants to go into the toilet, Chris returned to training with his suitcase and clothes to the office. Even though the problems he was experiencing were quite severe, he still tried to hide his problems from everyone. After coming home from training, he asked his friends to let them stay at her workplace, but his friend refused because the workplace can only accommodate women and children. Luckily, his friend gave information that there was a place that could accommodate the homeless, which opened at 5 p.m. Without thinking, Chris immediately went to that place, and there it was seen that if they stayed at that place, they had to queue for a very long time, and if the place is full, so they were forced to look elsewhere. While waiting in line, someone grabbed the queue, so that makes things chaotic. Luckily, a guard knew that Chris was the first in line, and finally he and his son were able to sleep in a better place than the station toilet. At night, the building guards had to turn off their electricity, so they have to sleep with no light at all. That night, without any light, Chris still used his time to study, because soon the employee eligibility test will be held soon. In the morning, he had to take all his items out of the place, so he went to the training ground with his clothes and suitcase. Chris had to make the most of his working time, because he had to queue at the homeless shelter at 5 p.m. Even to eat, Chris had to come to a church to get free food. Long story short, the employee eligibility test exam has arrived. This was his final determination to get a job as a broker, and to be able to queue at the shelter, he had to finish the exam quickly. Fortunately, he was able to complete all the exams, including the essay exam. When he was about to pick up his son, he met one of the officials who had interviewed him. The official borrowed the money because he forgot to bring the money to take a taxi, even though Chris only had one note left. And at night, when he put his son to sleep, suddenly his son asks if mother left because of him. He then explained that if his mother left of her own accord, not because of Christopher, heard that Christopher said that his father was a good father. There Chris felt proud of his son, and he again told him to go to sleep, while he was still trying to fix his medical device until it finally worked again and was sold to one of the doctors in the area. After getting the money, he gifts his son by renting out a hotel for the night, and take him on vacation at the beach. And the next day, when he returned to his training program, suddenly his manager called him and told him to immediately meet with the company officials. The officials reminded him that it was the last day for him. With a smile on his face, Chris tried hard to accept the decision, but apparently the officials announced that this was his last day as an intern, and tomorrow he has to return to the office as a permanent employee, and after starting his career at Dean Witter Reynolds. Now Chris has successfully founded his own financial services company, which he named Gardner Rich, and the film ends.